If you're so good, fix this plane. The boss mocked the poor boy, but what happened next? Richard Blackwell never imagined a 12-year-old boy could change his life forever. The metallic clang of the wrench hitting the concrete floor of the hangar echoed like a challenge as the businessman pointed to the faulty engine of his private jet. If you're as good as you say, fix this plane, he sneered, watching the boy who'd been caught peeking at the mechanics through the hangar's grated window. Ethan Carter trembled, but didn't back down. His small, calloused hands clenched into fists at his sides, his skinny frame dressed only in a faded light t-shirt and worn brown pants. He needed that job to help his sick mother at home. The medicine for Sarah Carter cost more than half of what she earned as a cleaner at the county hospital. The boss laughed cruelly when the boy asked for permission to try, betting his executives the kid would run off in minutes. But when those small hands began working with impressive precision, the laughter died in his throat. Ethan had taught himself mechanics by taking apart old appliances in the junkyard where he lived with his mother, in a wooden shack in the South Bronx. Since he was 8, when his father abandoned them, he'd scraped by collecting recyclables and fixing appliances for neighbors. His natural knack for machines led him to study discarded manuals he found in the hospital trash where his mother worked. The jet's engine had a complex issue that 3 certified mechanics couldn't solve in 2 weeks. The ignition system failed intermittently, causing dangerous vibrations during takeoff. Ethan asked for just an hour, and Richard, amused by the situation, ordered all the employees out to watch the intruding kid fail. "You'll see how this brat humiliates himself," he remarked to Frank Johnson, his head mechanic, a 50-year-old man who'd worked there over 20 years. But after 45 minutes of silent work, the engine purred perfectly. Ethan had identified that the problem wasn't in the main parts, but in a poorly made connection, causing electrical interference. A simple solution the experts hadn't thought to check. Frank, feeling threatened in his position, accused the boy of sabotaging the plane earlier just to fix it and impress the boss. The accusation made Richard doubt, and he demanded the boy fix another plane with a different issue. "This time under watch, kid," the businessman growled, crossing his arms over his dark suit. "If you pulled any tricks before, I'll find out now." Ethan's stomach tightened, not just from the suspicion, but because he hadn't eaten since the night before. Still, he focused on the second plane, a smaller model used for executive flights. The hydraulic system issue would have cost thousands in parts to replace. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, back to the story. The boy studied the system for half an hour, moving only his eyes and occasionally touching a few parts. Then he improvised a temporary fix, using a piece of rubber from an old hose and resealing it with a technique he'd learned fixing broken faucets in his neighborhood. "How on earth did you learn that?" Richard asked, genuinely intrigued as the system worked perfectly. "My mother always said necessity teaches you what you don't know," Ethan replied, wiping his grease-stained hands on his clothes. That afternoon's test flight went flawlessly. Richard needed to get to Washington, D.C. for an important meeting that would decide a multi-million-dollar contract. If he missed that flight, he'd lose the deal too. The plane worked flawlessly, and the businessman managed to close the contract that saved his company from a financial crisis no one knew existed. When Jennifer Blackwell arrived from England after completing her master's in aeronautical engineering at Caltech, she was intrigued by the stories about the prodigy boy her father had found. At 28, she was the opposite of her father in temperament, but she'd inherited his business smarts and the determination to get what she wanted. "Dad, tell me more about this boy's story," she asked, sitting in the leather chair of the office overlooking the hangar. "Jennifer, you won't believe it. That kid did in 40 minutes what our mechanics couldn't in weeks." She decided to test Ethan with complex theoretical problems in aerodynamics. To her surprise, the boy responded with creative solutions she'd never considered, despite all her academic training. When she found out Ethan had never attended formal school, she decided to dig deeper into his story. That's how she uncovered the truth about Sarah Carter. 5 years earlier, Sarah had worked as a cleaning supervisor at the administrative headquarters of Richard's company. She was respected by all the employees, known for her honesty and dedication. But one day, she was accused of stealing $15,000 from the finance department's safe. The evidence seemed conclusive. The money had gone missing at the end of Sarah's shift, and the security cameras only showed her near the safe at that time. Richard fired her for cause, with no severance, and even threatened to press criminal charges if she didn't return the money. Sarah always maintained her innocence, but no one believed her. She lost not just her job, but also her reputation. No company in the area would hire her after the story spread. She was forced to take day cleaning jobs, earning far less with no security. Jennifer discovered this by talking to former employees who still remembered the case. Some had always doubted Sarah's guilt, but never dared to challenge the boss's decision. "Dad, you need to revisit this case," Jennifer said one night, showing him the documents she'd gathered about the internal investigation. "Why? It's over. The woman stole, got fired, end of story," Richard replied without looking up from his financial reports. "What if she's innocent? Have you ever considered that?" "Jennifer, don't be naive. The evidence was clear." But Jennifer didn't give up. She started investigating on her own, talking to people who'd been at the company at the time. That's when she uncovered something disturbing about Walter Thompson, the accountant responsible for the safe back then. Walter had left the company 2 years after the incident with Sarah, but not by choice. There had been suspicions of irregularities in his accounting, though nothing was ever formally proven. Jennifer decided to track him down. She found Walter working as a freelance accountant in a small office downtown. The 60-year-old man looked far older, with completely white hair and a constantly nervous expression. "Mr. Thompson, I need to talk to you about the Sarah Carter case," Jennifer said, getting straight to the point. The man visibly paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. You were in charge of the safe when the money went missing." Walter tried to end the conversation, but Jennifer pressed on. She mentioned she was reviewing all the company's termination cases and that some inconsistencies had caught her attention. "If there's something you need to say, you'd better say it now," she pressed. "My father is considering hiring an external audit to review the books from the last 10 years. The lie worked." Walter crumbled. "I never meant for her to get fired," he confessed, tears in his eyes. "I was just going through financial trouble. My wife was sick. The medication cost a fortune." The truth was devastating. Walter had borrowed the money, planning to return it the following week when he received a payment from a client. But when the discrepancy was discovered sooner than expected, he panicked and let the suspicion fall on Sarah. He had falsified the security system logs, altering the timestamps to make it seem like only Sarah had accessed the vault that day. In reality, he had entered the office early in the morning using his spare key and taken the money. "I tried to return it later, but by then, it was too late. She had already been fired, and I was afraid of getting caught," Walter sobbed. "I've lived with this guilt for 5 years. Jennifer recorded the entire confession on her phone. With Walter's permission, he seemed relieved to finally tell the truth. She returned to the company with the evidence, determined to confront her father. "Dad, you need to see this," she said, placing the phone on his office desk. Richard listened to the recording in silence, his face hardening as he grasped the magnitude of the mistake he had made. When the audio ended, he sat quietly for several minutes. "My God," he murmured finally, "I destroyed an innocent family's life. And now? What are we going to do?" Jennifer asked. At first, Richard resisted admitting the mistake publicly. His pride wouldn't let him acknowledge that he had condemned an innocent person. But Jennifer's persistence and the guilt eating away at him finally made him reluctantly agree to speak with Sarah. Meanwhile, Ethan kept showing up at the hangar every day, working as a mechanic's assistant for spare change. Richard watched the boy from a distance, seeing in him a determination that reminded him of himself when he was young, struggling to build his business empire. One day, as he observed Ethan working, Richard asked casually, "Why aren't you in school, son?" "School doesn't pay the bills, sir," Ethan replied, without stopping his work. "My mom needs medicine every day, and I have to help her." "And your father?" Ethan stopped working and looked directly at Richard. "My father left when he found out my mom was sick, said he wasn't going to carry dead weight through life." The words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He was beginning to understand there was far more to this boy's story than he had imagined. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Jennifer, who had overheard the conversation, decided it was time to tell Ethan about the investigation she had been conducting regarding his mother. She called him into the office for a private talk. "Ethan, I've uncovered some things about what happened to your mother 5 years ago," she began carefully. The boy stopped fidgeting and looked straight at her. "What did you find out?" Jennifer told him the whole story, from the false accusation to Walter's confession. Ethan listened in silence, his small hands clenching into fists as he realized his family had been destroyed by a lie. "So my mom was telling the truth all along," he said finally, his voice shaking. "And no one believed her. Ethan, we're going to make this right. I'll make sure my father acknowledges his mistake and compensates you for the suffering he caused." But Ethan shook his head. "Do you think money can give my mother back 5 years of her life? Will it heal the sorrow she carries in her heart?" The mature response from the 12-year-old boy surprised Jennifer. She realized Ethan had grown up far too quickly, bearing responsibilities that should never have been his. That night, Ethan went home and told Sarah everything. The 42-year-old woman, who looked much older from years of suffering and illness, began to cry when she heard the confirmation she'd always been right. "I knew it, my son," she said, hugging Ethan. "I always knew God would bring the truth to light one day. Mom, they want to compensate us for what they did." Sarah shook her head. "Ethan, what I want most isn't money. It's for people to know I'm not a thief. That when my neighbors look me in the eye, they don't see a criminal." Sarah's health had worsened significantly in recent months. The stress of years of humiliation, combined with poor nutrition and lack of proper medical care, had aggravated a heart condition she'd hidden from her son. She collapsed at work on a Tuesday morning, and Ethan got the news when he arrived at the hangar. Jennifer offered to drive him to the hospital in her car, and during the ride, Ethan cried for the first time since she'd known him. "She's all I have," he sobbed. "If she's gone, I'll have no one left in the world." "Your mother isn't going anywhere, Ethan. We'll take care of her." At the hospital, doctors explained Sarah needed a complex heart surgery costing over $50,000. With no health insurance and county hospital's months-long waiting list, the situation was desperate. Ethan decided he'd work day and night to raise the money. He took on extra jobs, fixing private planes for other owners who'd heard of his skill. He slept in the hangar to save on transportation and ate only one meal a day. Richard watched from a distance, wrestling with his pride. Jennifer pressured her father daily to act, but he resisted. "Dad, you're watching that boy work himself to death because of our mistake, and you're doing nothing," she challenged him in a heated argument. "Jennifer, it's not that simple. If I publicly admit to an error of this magnitude, it'll shake our client's trust in the company." "Since when do you put business above doing what's right?" Richard had no answer. The truth was, he was afraid. Afraid to admit he'd ruined an innocent family's life. Afraid his reputation as a fair businessman would crumble. Afraid to face the consequences of his actions. Meanwhile, Ethan worked tirelessly. In 3 weeks, he'd saved nearly $15,000, but it still wasn't enough for the surgery. His own health began deteriorating from exhaustion and poor nutrition. Then, on a stormy night, everything changed. A private medical transport plane broke down in the neighboring hangar during an emergency mission. The plane carried organs that would save 3 lives, but its engine had completely failed. The on-duty mechanic couldn't fix the issue, and the organs had a strict transplant deadline. Hearing the commotion, Ethan offered to help, despite being drenched and exhausted. The other hangar's owner, initially skeptical, let the boy try when he realized there were no other options. Working under torrential rain leaking through the hangar's gaps, Ethan diagnosed a complex electrical system failure causing cascading malfunctions in multiple components. He worked for 4 straight hours, using improvised techniques he had developed over the months. At 3 in the morning, the engine was running perfectly again. The plane took off just in time to save the 3 lives that depended on the organs. Ethan collapsed from exhaustion as soon as the aircraft disappeared into the night sky. Richard had watched the entire operation, impressed by the boy's dedication. When he saw Ethan lying on the hangar floor, Shivering from cold and exhaustion, something broke inside him. "My God, what have I become?" he murmured, rushing to help the boy. He carried Ethan to his car and took him home, where Sarah was still awake despite the late hour. Richard looked at the thin, pale woman he had wronged so many years before, and finally, his conscience overcame his pride. "Sarah, I need to ask for your forgiveness," he said, tears in his eyes. Sarah looked at him in surprise, not understanding what was happening. "I made a terrible mistake 5 years ago. You were innocent, and I destroyed your life because I was too quick to judge." Richard told her the whole truth about Walter and the confession Jennifer had obtained. Sarah listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. "I always knew the truth would come out one day," she finally said. "But I never imagined you would come here yourself to apologize. I'll make this right, Sarah. I'll pay for your surgery. I'll offer you a job. I'll do whatever it takes to make up for the suffering I caused." Sarah shook her head. "Mr. Blackwell, what I want most isn't financial compensation. It's for people to know I was always honest. For my son to grow up knowing his mother never did anything wrong." The next day, Richard did something no one expected. He called a meeting with all the company employees and in front of Ethan and Sarah, publicly admitted the mistake he had made. "5 years ago, I fired Sarah Carter, accusing her of theft. Today, I learned she was innocent and that one of my employees fabricated evidence to cover up his own mistake," he said, his voice steady despite the difficulty of speaking the words. "I want to publicly apologize to her and her son Ethan and take full responsibility for the years of suffering I caused this family." The hangar was completely silent. Many employees knew the story and were shocked by the revelation. Richard announced that Sarah would be reinstated as general supervisor, with full back pay for the 5 years, including vacation, bonuses, and 401k contributions. He also pledged to cover her medical treatment in full. But the biggest surprise came when he turned to Ethan. "Ethan, I'd like to offer you more than just a job. I want you to be my minority partner in the company. Your skills and dedication deserve recognition." The 12-year-old boy looked at his mother, who nodded with a tearful smile. "Mr. Blackwell, I accept, but on one condition," Ethan said, surprising everyone with his maturity. "What condition?" "I want us to create a program to give opportunities to other kids like me. Kids who have talent but no chance to show it." Richard smiled for the first time in weeks. "Deal, partner." In the months that followed, much changed at Richard Blackwell's company. Sarah underwent successful surgery and made a full recovery. She took on her new role with the dignity of someone who had always known her own honesty. Ethan, though still a minor, officially became a partner through an investment fund managed by his mother. He continued studying mechanics and aerodynamics, now with access to the best books and courses available. The program for young talent became a reality. The Dream Workshop, as it was named, welcomed boys and girls from underprivileged communities who were interested in learning mechanics and aviation. Ethan became a sort of mentor to the younger ones, teaching not just techniques, but also the importance of honesty and persistence. Jennifer gradually took on more responsibilities in the company, working alongside Ethan to modernize processes and implement new technologies. The combination of her academic background and his practical intuition proved incredibly effective. Richard, in turn, underwent a profound transformation. The proud and inflexible man became more human, more willing to listen and admit his mistakes. He began visiting Sarah and Ethan's home regularly, developing a paternal bond with the boy he had initially scorned. A year after their first meeting in the hangar, the company had grown significantly. Customers were impressed not only by the quality of the services, but also by the redemption story that became well known in the industry. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. National recognition came when Ethan, now 13, was invited to participate in an international competition for young aviation talents. The competition would take place in New York City, bringing together the best young mechanics and engineers from across North America. Jennifer secretly entered Ethan, believing he had the potential to represent the United States with honor. When she told him about the registration, the boy grew nervous. "Miss Jennifer, I've never competed against anyone before. What if I don't know how to do what they ask?" "Ethan, you've already proven you know more than many trained adults. Trust me." Preparations for the competition were intense. Ethan studied advanced aerodynamics, complex electronic systems, and new aviation technologies. Richard hired the best private tutors to accelerate the boy's learning, but not everything went smoothly. Frank Johnson, the former head mechanic who had never accepted Ethan's rise, still held a grudge against the boy. Outwardly, he had accepted the situation, but inside, he plotted a way to humiliate Ethan. The night before the competition, Frank subtly sabotaged the toolkit Ethan would use for the test. He loosened some connections, swapped out parts for similar but incompatible ones, and altered the settings on some measuring instruments. On the day of the competition, held in a massive hangar in New York City, Ethan faced a complex challenge, diagnosing and fixing multiple faults in an airplane engine that had been deliberately modified to malfunction. Competitors had 4 hours to solve all the problems. Ethan started confidently, but soon realized his tools weren't working properly. His screwdrivers didn't fit the bolts snugly, and his measuring instruments gave inconsistent readings. At first, he panicked. He saw other competitors, 15 and 16-year-olds with formal technical training, working efficiently with their equipment. Ethan began doubting himself. "I shouldn't be here," he muttered. "They know so much more than I do." But then he remembered his mother's words. "Necessity teaches even what you don't know." Ethan decided to improvise. Using only his intuition and creativity, he began working differently from the others. Instead of following standard protocols, he applied techniques he'd developed while fixing old appliances in the junkyard. When his tools failed, he improvised replacements using materials available in the hangar. When the instruments gave incorrect readings, he used alternative diagnostic methods he had learned out of necessity. The competition judges began paying attention to the American boy, who worked completely differently from the others. While the rest followed manuals and formal procedures, Ethan seemed to dance around the engine, touching, listening, sensing the problems before fixing them. With 1 hour left, Ethan had identified 5 of the 6 issues in the engine. The last one was the most complex, a flaw in the electronic system causing interference between different components. That's when his junkyard experience proved invaluable. Ethan recognized the failure pattern because he had seen something similar in old TVs he repaired for neighbors. The problem wasn't in the individual parts, but in how they interacted. He mentally redesigned the entire circuit, finding an elegant solution that not only fixed the issue but improved the system's overall efficiency. When he finished, only 10 minutes remained. The engine ran perfectly, performing better than the original. The judges were impressed not just by the result, but by Ethan's innovative methodology. The results were announced at a formal ceremony. Ethan not only won the competition, but received a special mention for exceptional innovation and creativity. The prize included a full scholarship to an aviation technical school and $15,000 in cash. When Ethan stepped on stage to accept the award, he saw Richard, Sarah, and Jennifer in the audience, applauding with tears in their eyes. He thought about how far he'd come since that first day in the hangar when he had been humiliated and challenged. In his acceptance speech, Ethan surprised everyone. "I want to dedicate this award to my mother, who taught me that honesty is worth more than any money. To Mr. Blackwell, who gave me a chance when no one else would, and to all the kids who, like me, grow up thinking they're worthless. You're not. You just need someone to believe in you." The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. After the competition, Frank's sabotage was uncovered. One of the judges, puzzled by the difficulties Ethan had faced, inspected his tools and noticed the malicious tampering. Frank was fired immediately and even faced legal action for sabotage. Ironically, his attempt to humiliate Ethan only made the boy's victory more impressive, proving he could overcome any obstacle. In the following months, Ethan became a minor celebrity in aviation circles. Specialized magazines ran stories about the junkyard prodigy who revolutionized an international competition. Job offers and partnership proposals poured in from across the country and even abroad. Multinational companies wanted to hire Ethan, offering salaries he had never dreamed possible, but Ethan chose to stay. He had found his family at Richard's company and felt a commitment to the dream workshop he didn't want to abandon. "Uncle Richard," he said one Sunday during lunch at the businessman's home. Ethan had started calling him Uncle naturally. "I want to stay here. This is my place." Richard smiled, proud of the boy who had become like a son to him. "And we want you to stay, Ethan. You're part of this family now." The company continued growing, but always maintained the social commitment Ethan had inspired. The Dream Workshop trained dozens of young mechanics who found dignified jobs and changed their lives. Sarah became a mother figure to many of the young people in the program. His story of struggle and perseverance inspired the boys and girls who arrived disheartened but left full of hope and skill. Jennifer developed an innovative methodology that combined formal technical education with the practical techniques Ethan had mastered. The methodology was recognized by the Department of Education and began to be used in technical schools across the country. Richard, who at the beginning of the story was a proud and insensitive man, transformed into a mentor and benefactor for hundreds of young people. He discovered that helping others gave him more satisfaction than accumulating wealth. 2 years after their first meeting, the company had become a national benchmark in executive aviation. But more important than the commercial success was the social impact they had achieved. Ethan, now 14, already mastered advanced concepts of aeronautical engineering and worked on developing innovative solutions for the industry. He maintained his humility and connection to his roots, always remembering where he had started. One Friday afternoon, while supervising the work of some young people at the Dream Workshop, Ethan received an unexpected call. It was from the father who had abandoned him years before. "Ethan, it's me, your dad. I saw you on TV at the competition. I wanted to talk to you." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. For a moment, he was once again the 8-year-old boy who watched his father walk away without looking back. "What do you want?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Son, I made a terrible mistake. I want to come back. I want to be part of your life again." Ethan looked around the hangar, seeing Sarah talking with Richard about the company's next steps, Jennifer guiding a group of young people, and the entire family he had built over those difficult years. "Dad, I already have a family," he replied calmly. "People who stayed with me when everything was hard. You chose to leave when I needed you most. Now I choose to stay with those who were always there for me." He hung up the phone and returned to work, feeling at peace with his decision. In the years that followed, Ethan continued to grow both personally and professionally. At 16, he developed an innovation in engine systems that was patented and sold to international manufacturers, generating significant royalties for the company. But Ethan always insisted that part of the profits be invested in the Dream Workshop and other social programs. He never forgot where he came from and made sure other young people had the same opportunities he had earned. Sarah remarried, this time to one of the instructors at the technical school Richard had founded. He was a kind man who truly loved her and treated Ethan like his own son. The family was finally complete and happy. Jennifer became company president at 30, with Ethan as the youngest vice president in the industry's history. Together, they innovated not just technologically, but also socially, creating a business model that cared as much about profits as it did about social impact. Richard, now in his 60s, devoted himself more to the company's philanthropic activities. He often said Ethan had been the best investment of his life, not financially, but humanly. Ethan's story became legendary in the American business world. Books were written about his journey, and he became an example of how talent and determination can overcome any obstacle. But for Ethan, the most important thing wasn't the awards or recognition. It was knowing he had helped transform the lives of hundreds of young people through the Dream Workshop, and that he had contributed to restoring his mother's dignity and happiness, which had once been taken from her. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, 5 years after their first meeting in the hangar, Ethan piloted his first solo flight. It was a small plane he had restored himself, using techniques that combined his hands-on experience with advanced theoretical knowledge. As he flew over New York City, he looked down and saw the hangar where it all began. He saw the simple wooden shack where he had lived with his mother before everything changed. He saw the technical school that now bore his name and graduated hundreds of young people each year. Over the radio, he heard Richard's voice from the makeshift control tower in the hangar. "Ethan, you're flying beautifully. How does it feel up there?" Ethan smiled, remembering the frightened boy who had been caught peeking through the hangar window years earlier. "Uncle Richard, I feel like I finally arrived where I always belonged," he replied. "In the sky, but with my feet firmly on the ground." When he landed, a small crowd was waiting for him. Sarah with tears of pride in her eyes, Jennifer clapping enthusiastically, Richard smiling like a proud father. And dozens of young people from the Dream Workshop, seeing in Ethan proof that their own dreams were possible. The hangar that had once been a place of humiliation had become a school of opportunity where young talents discovered they could soar high, no matter where they were born. Ethan stepped out of the plane and was embraced by everyone. In that moment, he knew he had found not just a career but a life purpose, to show other young people that with determination and opportunity, anyone could rewrite their story. The company continued to grow and innovate. The Dream Workshop expanded to other cities, always upholding the philosophy of providing real opportunities for talented youth from the South Bronx. Sarah became the national director of the social program, traveling across the country to implement new branches. Her story of perseverance inspired not only the young participants, but also their families, proving that honesty and persistence are always rewarded. Jennifer pioneered groundbreaking technologies in sustainable aviation, always working alongside Ethan, who brought practical solutions to complex problems. Together, they revolutionized not just their company, but the entire national aviation industry. Richard became one of the leading advocates for technical education in the country, using his business influence to convince other entrepreneurs to invest in programs like the Dream Workshop. And Ethan, the boy who had once been humiliated and challenged to fix a plane, became one of the nation's foremost aviation authorities, always remembering that his greatest pride wasn't his technical achievements, but the lives he had helped transform. The story that began with mockery and scorn became one of the most beautiful tales of redemption and perseverance in American business, proving that sometimes the greatest transformations begin when we give a chance to those who've never had the opportunity to prove their worth. End of story. So, what did you think of Ethan's incredible journey? This story shows us that talent isn't determined by birth, and sometimes the people we doubt the most are the ones who have the most to teach us. Tell us in the comments, have you ever been in a situation where someone doubted your abilities? How did it go? And what did you think of Richard's transformation? Did he deserve forgiveness? I'd love to hear your honest thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories like this one.